Right. Sabrina, if you'd be willing to share the slide.
Yes, sure.
Great. First of all, thank you for being here. It is so amazing. We are actually at our 6th and final webinar for the SADC Futures Training Series, and we have an all-star cast and we have all-star participation. So we're really delighted. We're also a little bit already homesick that we might miss you next week. So I think let's just go ahead and start with the first poll, the second poll, apologies, we've already checked how we feel. And we just want to ask you to please let us know again which category best describes you. So if we could all just choose.
We're about 65% of votes. So let's
get a few more.
Yeah, also because participants are still coming in.
Great.
We've got 45 now. And as we say in the poll itself, if you select other, please, it would be great if you could specify what other means in the chat. 76, I think we can end the poll, Constance, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, thank you, Pierre.
So let's 3, 2, 1, and the poll is now closed. And I'm now broadcasting the results.
Okay, fantastic. Well, forgive me. So we do have quite a good distribution. We're still like rocking the research and academia world, but I'm really delighted that we've got NGO participation, local and national government. We've got some of our colleagues from the intergovernmental organizations and some private sector and development partners. So we're very grateful for all of your participation. And if you were an other, please do let us know in the chat box. So with that, I just will move on and just remind us that we are here for webinar 6. And today is about a review of the Foresight tools and tailoring a practical action for future work. And as you can see, we've got a broad range of partners that have helped put all of this together. And you've got a great set of resource people coming to you today. So just quickly, I'd like to run through the flow of today. So first and foremost, we took your insights from last week, and we're going to do a recap of the case study that went through our training framework, our Foresight framework. And then we're very fortunate to be joined by our colleague Marieke from Central America to give us a case study on how they used Foresight for their CSA strategy. We're going to go into some group work and dig deeper on some of the tools that you wanted to review, have a quick stretch, and then we're going to have conversations about how we can apply our tools. And so we'll spend a good bit of time on that. And then lastly, then we'll move on and do some evaluation, have the closing remarks on behalf of the partners. And then this time, we're actually going to keep the event open for an extra 30 minutes for any networking. So this is optional, but we'll be here, and we'll look forward to giving you some insights on how that networking session will work. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Sabrina.
Great, thanks so much, Constance. Yeah, so just as mentioned, I mean, I think hopefully many people are quite expert by now in terms of some of the steps and the key stages around Foresight. But just to remind everyone as we go into this kind of final session, that we really developed and built the training around some key steps and stages, we started back in webinar 1, 6 weeks ago, understanding in terms of the input and context, and ran through these different stages in terms of completing last week, thinking about reflection and strategy, and really answering some of these kind of core questions around what is happening in the future, why is it happening, and what might we want to do differently. So we've really tried to build a set of methodologies and tools and applications across this. So just to give a bit more detail, as everybody's, I'm sure, really familiar with this setup right now, we've gone and run through in detail in terms of these methodologies. And just to remind everyone, we obviously didn't have specific sessions dedicated to some of those 2 key ones you see at the top around data, evidence, knowledge, and creativity, as well as the stakeholder engagement and participation. And just wanted to reiterate that in the Foresight process, that these really happen across your whole stages. So we did have some really good discussions and probing questions around who do we bring in, how can we make it participatory, at what levels can we do it, and when do we bring in evidence. So I think, hope that just sort of reiterates in terms of that these steps happen across the whole Foresight process. And then just to remind everyone, in terms of there is no set way of doing this, we have taught a number of tools, methods, and approaches, but everyone here might go away and say, this key method or this key tool is one that's really going to be valuable in my work, and that's going to really help me adopt a futures approach, and this is what I'll take forward. So we wouldn't expect everyone to be taking this whole framework and all of these tools and processes and methods and immediately integrating them into their work. But today is about helping to flesh out what would be the most valuable ways you can integrate what you've learned in the training into application. So I just remind you, before we dive in terms of doing a recap, we have the chat box running the whole time. As Constance said, we have a kind of all-star set of moderators. We've got the whole training team with us today, which we're really lucky and very grateful for everyone who's woken up at different time zones. So for the participants, please just keep registering your questions. We've got everyone on hand to make sure that people leave today feeling really confident and their questions are answered in terms of how they would apply their learning. So we're going to just start in terms of a recap on the training framework, just because I think in terms of learning and training, it's quite nice to go back over, as we've done this over 6 weeks. And we also wanted to really build out essentially the case study that we've used. So we've been teaching methods and tools, but we've been doing it in a very applied way. We've been focusing around climate resilience and around agricultural systems, and of course in the SADC region. So I take us back to the first webinar where we thought about and understood the input stage, where really it's about understanding the context, and we broke this down into several steps. So within our scope method, we really try to understand our theme or key topic, our geopolitical boundary, the structures and policies. Those allow us to then give a realistic timeline for how you would build your Foresight process. And then we start the initial process around stakeholder mapping. So if we were to start on the first step within the scope, in terms of thinking about theme or key topic, remember we, in terms of the examples, are using the agri-food system. So we built out that even if your theme or topic might seem quite simple at the beginning, when you start to flesh it out and build it out, there's a lot of elements that go into it. So we started with the agri-food system, if we look in the center of the slide, and we said just within the agricultural aspect, there's many things going on, from production, there's different production systems such as livestock and aquaculture, there's employment issues, there's labor, etc. So even within our central core system, our theme, there's a lot happening, and then we built it out. So we'd really encourage, when you start to think about your Foresight process, in this first step, even if your theme might seem very simple or logical, it's a really, really valuable time to flesh it out. And Romy's going to be leading a working group later, so she'll be able to help expand on any questions around this. Our second element in terms of our theme, which we've built out in the training, has been about climate resilience. And specifically, we've been looking at dimensions of a climate resilient agricultural system. So here we've been looking and teaching around, essentially climate resilience can be thought of as a set of capacities. And we've been looking in terms of those capacities in terms of infrastructure and what is the adaptive structures in place, the capacity of people themselves to adapt, the ecosystems and what ecosystem services that could be built upon to enhance resilience, livelihoods and farming systems, and in terms of farm functioning, and then governance in terms of proactive institutions and organizations. So again, we might think of climate resilience and just think of maybe something that pops in your head as like, that's very obviously adapting to climate change. But when you start to unpack your theme and your topic, you can see that there's many, many areas that go into it. And these all, just in this instance of climate resilience, these will all impact the potential outcome of the future. Then the next stage in our scope, because with the Foresight exercise, the way you want to plan out and think about what might be impacting your future, there are many elements that come into it. A key thing is to kind of bound your geopolitical boundary. So saying, at what level am I working? What is the maybe, it might even be at a community, it might be at a farm level, it might be at a district level. This depends in terms of your work and whether it's a project or how you're going to be applying this. In the training, we've obviously taken the SADC Futures project is at a regional level. So we've taken you through the training, building examples at the regional level. So this is essentially in a Foresight process, we have quite a complex region in terms of the 16 member states. There's lots of different variability across our countries, and there's lots of different activities, and there's lots of different features, sociocultural to GDP, etc. So in this stage, you really try and flesh out what's really happening in terms of the geography that I'm interested in. Then we move on to say, okay, so within our geography and our geographic scope and our kind of boundary that we've set for our Foresight exercise, what structures and policies are in place? And we know, so if we were to layer at a regional level, it would be easy for us to zone in and say, okay, what policies exist at the SADC level? Because that's what we're focused on. But it's really useful to take a step back in terms of a bigger layer of structures and policies. So this would be understanding in terms of continental level goals, global level goals. We've got things such as the SDGs and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Again, remembering that our theme is around agricultural systems and climate resilience. So if you were going to apply Foresight to something like trade, there might be global level trade agreements or something that you would really need to kind of like layer on what are the structures and policies. And then also, even though we're at a regional scale, it's really valuable to look down to national level examples. We've got 16 member states. They all have their own layers of policies and structures that are impacting how at a national level, things are being governed. And that obviously will impact how the future might emerge within those specific member states, and then also how that might impact at a regional level. So that allows us to then move on to the next step in scope in terms of setting your timeline. We've had a couple of questions throughout the training in terms of saying, how do I set my timeline for a Foresight exercise? How far ahead am I looking? Is it 5 years? Is it 10? Is it 50? What's realistic? And I think, again, just saying there's no specific way or methodology you have to prescribe to do Foresight. In our instance, for example, in the SADC region, we know we have the climate change action plan and strategy that's currently been revised and will go up to 2030. We've got RISTEP, which is the Regional Integrated Strategic Development Plan, which takes us from 2020 to 2030. So we know we have two very strong kind of policy incentives that are leading us into a kind of 10-year planning cycle. So we have built a lot of our examples and our Foresight process around this 10-year cycle. So we said, okay, we want to look through to 2030 and plan for that. But again, the structures and the policies, and if you're working at a much smaller level, at a community level or a district, this might mean that your Foresight exercise really wants to say, what's going to happen in the next season or 2 seasons ahead, And that's the timeline that I think is most practical for the work I'm doing. We then started to unpack as the final stage in scope, who are the stakeholders and how they link. So again, if we were going to take our regional level example, and this would be very high level, we started to map out, okay, in terms of the agri-food system and in terms of climate resilience, who needs to be engaged at this regional scale. So right through from media, through to financial institutions, to the RECs, the regional economic communities, to civil society, grassroots organizations, farmers, commercial players, etc. So we, in the scope stage, also build out your stakeholder map and then start to plan out how your engagement will work. And then that kind of brings us to the first part of the framework that we got through in terms of the context and the scope. I'm now going to quickly take you through in terms of analysis, where the core question we really try to answer with some of the examples that we built is what is happening. And I'd remind you to keep registering questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure we get to those if there's anything you want to dive into in more detail. So analysis had three kind of key methods that we taught around trends, around horizon scanning, and at this stage, the importance of bringing in evidence in terms of your analysis. So in terms of trends, just to give one example of what we built, we were looking in terms of saying, okay, if we were to look back, the trend analysis took a historical view. So we said, in terms of the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, what are some of the key agriculture or climate change events that have happened? How might this historical trajectory impact where we're going into the future? So we went over multiple kind of different trends, and Leslie led this work in our second webinar. And we looked at lots of different ways of like looking at trends and then how you analyze them. So this is your first stage in terms of the analysis phase. And then in terms of horizon scanning, it's an organization process in terms of putting your trends together and then saying what are the large scale trends that might be impacting and how would they have an impact on our future. And Leslie had a very good kind of run through in terms of some of the key mega trends that are going to be impacting the SADC region. So this was our application of the tool horizon scanning, where we understood that there's key things that are going to be impacting the SADC region over the coming 10 to 20 years and beyond in terms of their impact from aspects such as population, to poverty, to energy demand, unemployment, etc. So these will all be contained and detailed a lot more in the toolkit and the accompanying reports that are coming out with the SADC Futures work. But this is the method around horizon scanning, and this is about organizing and starting to analyze these key trends. So in terms of in the analysis phase, we also looked at evidence, and I would remind you that just about evidence running across the framework. The key aspect is that there's not one place in a Foresight exercise whether you gather all your evidence and you say we're done, because you will keep unpacking different methodologies and realizing you need to dig in and grab and dive in and get more evidence. And evidence can be defined quite broadly from data through to knowledge sources, you know, and these are brought together in different formats. So Claire led us through this work, and she'll also be running a group later in terms of diving in around what is the future climate risks in the region and looking at different hotspots, etc. So Claire presented us a very detailed set of like evidence that could be used in terms of future planning around climate resilience. So in this case, a vulnerability map and looking at where might be the areas with the greatest vulnerability and the least, again, at our kind of case study at a regional scale. We then dived into the third part of the framework to say, why is it happening? And this is really important in Foresight because it sort of takes a step back from these trends we know are happening, we know our scope, and we now need to kind of dive in terms of interpretation and say, okay, why are these patterns happening? If we understand that, we might be better placed to predict and plan for the future. So Constance led us through around systems mapping. This again was in the second webinar. We were looking in terms of mapping out our system and really unpacking what are the different components. So Constance took us through this method in terms of from the starting with the farming system and then looking at what the different components that come into it. So you see there's many different linkages. And then we took some of the trends that Leslie outlined. So we said, okay, maybe one of the key things would be an environmental driver in terms of land degradation. And then looking and saying, okay, where does that impact our system? And Constance will be running a group a bit later in terms of diving more into some of these methods. We then sort of touched around how multi-stakeholder and cross-sectoral approaches were really key. So in your Foresight process, being able to engage across sectors that maybe are linked and maybe don't work together currently, or critically need to be involved together to deal with an issue that you're seeing is coming up in your wider system. So in the agricultural area, we talked about, for example, you might have a water ministry that is separate to an agriculture ministry, but they might be working on a joint water-related issue. So how do we bring in more of these cross-sectoral approaches? I'm going to now hand over to Constance. She's going to run us through the last 3 stages of the framework and some of the examples we've done.
Thanks so much, Sabrina, and thanks for bearing with us. We really just wanted to give you sort of a seamless view of everything that we have been working on throughout the 5 previous webinars. So we're going to move into the plan stage. And the plan stage, the overarching question is, what do we want to experience in the future? But we're also asking what might get in the way. And we also start to think about what we might want to do to get there. So within the plan stage, we have visioning, causal analysis, thank you, stakeholder analysis, backcasting, and pathway development. So just on building the vision, sorry, Sabrina, should I do this? Okay, building the vision, and thank you for your help. One of the things that we did build on is this idea of a systems thinking, so that as we build a vision, that we're taking into account all the different dimensions around the agri-food system and climate resilience that we had taken into account. So we chose to identify what were those key outcomes that we desired in building a vision. This is just a piece of it, and talked about how then do we articulate the supporting elements, as well as what would have to be in place in the very long term to ensure that this vision is sustained. And one of the aspects of this vision is that it brings together different actors with different objectives to try and bring people into a focus on a collective vision. When we talked about what gets in the way, we did move into our causal analysis. Now we showed causal analysis as why are some of the major barriers happening, because we wanted to understand what are the different root causes, if you will, and what kinds of dimensions are represented. So we looked at water scarcity as a potential barrier for getting in the way of a vision for climate resilient agri-food system. And what we said is that we know that there are environmental issues that cause this. We know there are institutional issues, unsustainable agricultural practices, potentially ineffective, underfunded extension. There are political issues because we don't always have the policies being implemented, and that was said by many of our colleagues in the group, as well as social and economic issues. So with a better understanding of where we wanted to go and what could get in the way, we did a very brief activity on backcasting. And the point of backcasting is that you assume that you have reached your vision, you have reached your target. So if in 2030 you have this vision, it is operational, then you look back with a creative mind and you ask, how did we get here? And so you put yourself in a position of what do you remember about the activities, and what do you remember about how we overcame our barriers. So it's a very creative moment for opening the mindset and thinking of ways that you could achieve that vision. In the next part, we spent quite a bit of energy on pathway development. And here we really unpacked, you know, what are the elements when you're building out your pathway, and what are the very specific elements in a pathway action plan, the what, the who, the by, when, how, outputs, outcomes, etc., that are going to help you achieve that vision. And with that, we, using our case of climate resilience and agri-food systems, we identified several pathways that we could potentially put in place. For example, agroecological climate smart processes to lead us to outcomes that would get us to the overall outcome of climate resilience, and markets for small grains. And then we also talked a bit about, oh, we could have one on digital extension. So we were looking at some ways, we were building out pathways that could take us towards this vision. And Philip is going to give a session on this. So we then looked across these and said, oh, but there might be trade-offs, right? So if we're all in our individual places trying to write these pathways, oh, we're going to have to make sure we come together and say, are there potential things that could happen that would keep one pathway from succeeding? And so you really have to bridge those together by understanding the trade-offs. So following this, we moved into the prospection stage, what might happen, where we developed scenarios, identified drivers and critical uncertainties, and developed plausible future scenarios. And here, with the help of Leslie, we talked through the steps that would help us to actually develop storylines for these scenarios that we wanted to develop. So we went through a 7-step process to get to those, and so maybe just the next slide, I could just show that, for example, we grouped our drivers, right? We brainstormed our drivers, we grouped our drivers, again, using these dimensions, if you will, of sustainable development. And then we actually rated those to see which ones would be highly uncertain, which ones would be of critical importance. And we sieved through those collectively and came out with several scenarios for which we thought the drivers were both highly uncertain and highly and critically important. So for example, we developed the one around youth unemployment, going from low to high, and integration at the regional level or national borders closing. And we also highlighted that within each of those quadrants, you might develop a storyline related to the different dimensions. So we're really keeping this systems perspective so we don't forget a discipline that we're not used to working on. And with that, we went into quadrants, we developed these storylines, and you added a lot of value to these storylines, and then we unpacked many more in our breakout groups, I believe it was last week. So then the point here is that you do many scenarios. You don't have to get too bogged down in them, but you do many. And then you look across to see, okay, now what is the desired future scenario that we want to target? So lastly, we did a reflection, and we also moved towards our strategy. So we asked, what might we do differently and what will we do differently? So we actually understood our scenario implications. We talked about those elements that transform our pathways, and talked about how do we move transformational change towards transformed pathways. And with that, we first took our scenarios, we reviewed them, and we identified some of the actions that we could take to both meet the desired future and to overcome some of the unfortunate futures that we had described. And after we had done that, we moved into talking about, okay, so we've identified our initial set of actions. What would we want to do? What could we do if we were to really introduce transformative change? We talked about moving from iterative change, which is, yes, we've just got this idea and we're just going to go and put that in place, to actually, what if we did something that would really move the needle? So with transformative, we talked about ways of doing different kinds of interventions, policies, and partnerships. So we went back and we identified some key steps in order to take either a pathway we already have or a new designed pathway. And we said, first of all, we clarify the outcomes, we prioritize the transformative actions, we get new partnerships in place and stakeholders, we build these climate resilient pathways or modify the new ones, or modify existing ones, and then roles and modalities are agreed upon, and then focal points to actually integrate this into our decision and policy processes. So as an example, what we did was we took one of the original pathways and we went back in and we said, what would we do differently? So we identified very key new linkages that we could use. So for example, large farmers, small farmers, using in a co-learning mechanism. We identified very new types of partners and use this as an opportunity to upgrade or transform our action plan. And so I believe with that, this has been a whirlwind tour of the last 5 seminars. And so we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Constance. We have a few questions registered. So just before we hand over to Marieke, who's going to take us through the case study, I think it would be useful just to register some of these questions. I'm just going through these now. Yeah, in terms of Gwen was saying about different ways we can focus, and I think you've already responded in terms of the importance of taking a systems view. Is there any other burning questions in terms of that walkthrough of the framework? As mentioned, we are going to have these breakout groups just now where you'll have a deep chance with the moderators to choose your topic and really go through and play those back. So in the interest of time, if there's no breaking questions, we'll make sure to get back to the ones in the chat box. I'd like to hand over to Marieke, who's going to give us a case study. Marieke, would you like me to keep sharing my slides and walk through, or would you like to share yours?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Sabrina. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here with you. I've been following the webinar series, and I think it's super interesting and amazing work that you're doing. Well, happy to share this case study of a policy we helped formulate in Central America. Just to give a short introduction, my name is Marieke Veeger. I'm a scenarios and policy researcher, and I work for CCAFS, which is the CGR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security. And I'm based at the University of International Cooperation. To give you a bit of an idea of the region that we're focusing on in this policy. So here, as we see in the map, we're focusing on Central America, but also especially on the SICA region. SICA is the system of integration of Central America and actually also includes Belize and the Dominican Republic. Okay, if you could change to the next slide. So I'd like to tell you a bit about the CCAFS Future Scenarios project. It's a project that we're implementing since 2013 in 6 different regions on a global scale: Central America and Andes region, in Western and Eastern Africa, South Asia and Southeast Asia, and also in the Pacific. The next one, please. The main objective of the CCAFS Future Scenarios project is to work together with different countries, generating socioeconomic and climate scenarios to support decision makers in the formulation of long-term policies to address climate change. The way you've been all learning about different ways to prospect the future, and we work with future scenarios. And the way that these scenarios are created is that they're basically based on drivers of change for agriculture, food security, environment, and livelihoods. And we've been working together with IFPRI and IASA to the International Food Policy Institute and IASA to then model these different scenarios with partial equilibrium models to get a better understanding of possible impacts of those scenarios. I think the main aspect of our Future Scenarios project is that it's totally demand driven. So stakeholders from the region are the ones that make the scenarios, and they're also the ones that indicate what policies the scenario should be used for to test and robust and help formulate them. Okay, so just let me tell you a bit about this formulation process of this Central American CSA strategy. Let's see, I think when we support the formulation of a policy, as you've also been learning in this course, it's not only about prospecting the future, but we actually work with policymakers to within a process. So something that we're focusing a lot on is making sure that the recommendations that are given for a policy are really embedded in a decision-making process, mainly to make sure that all these recommendations are actually taken into account. So within the Central American and the SICA region, this decision was made to design this CSA policy, the climate smart agriculture policy. Central America is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change and had already been feeling those impacts for a few years already. Central America is a region where most of the agriculture is done by small scale holders, so they're even more vulnerable to climate change. And this took a while to be preparing things, but basically we started this whole process in December 2016 with a regional workshop on strategic axes and lines of action. So what we did in the first place is identify what stakeholders should be participating in this process. And something that was very useful is that Central America already had a system in place of different regional technical groups of representatives of ministries of agriculture that just talk and discuss together about and collaborate together on agriculture issues. So these representatives participated in the process. And another important organ that made sure that we had the right people on board was an interagency group of mainly non-governmental organizations, both from on a national scale, on an international scale, but also from universities and research centers that could also hop along and think about these future issues. And so in the first stage, these people came together in a regional workshop to really set up the main structure of the policy. So these strategic axes and lines of action. And after this workshop, there was still a period of virtual collaboration to really work a bit more in detail on the policy, to refine some details within it. And already a few months later, we organized a regional scenarios workshop to test and robust the policy. And I will tell you a bit about that, about the workshop and what different steps we went through with the stakeholders to look at with a critical lens at this policy. And after this regional workshop, there was an online open consultation with a much broader audience that could then also give their opinions on the policy and things that we might have missed or that they wanted to add. And then a few months later, the CSA policy for Central America was then approved. So as you can see, this was a very, very fast process. And we've been trying to understand, how did that happen? What were the success factors to make this happen? So I'll tell you a bit about that as well. Okay, so what is it that you do in a scenarios workshop or in a scenarios driven process when you critically look at the policy? So in the first step of the workshop, it was about 2.5 days. We didn't work with scenarios yet. So stakeholders basically looked at the draft version of a policy to see what was still missing. Is there something that we haven't looked at? There are other stakeholders involved in this scenarios workshop, so they could give their view on if we look at the objectives of this policy, what's still missing. And the second step, what we did was adjust the narrative of regional future scenarios that were made a few years earlier to make sure that they would talk about variables that were relevant for the policy. So let me first tell you about these regional scenarios. In 2013, in Costa Rica or in Central America, a group of regional stakeholders made future scenarios on agriculture, environment, food security, and livelihoods in Central America. They were then modeled afterwards with the impact model, with this partial equilibrium model, mainly focusing on economic impacts from these future drivers. And what we did was make sure that these 4 different scenarios, which had quite a broad scope, would really talk about issues that were addressed in the policy. But as you know, each scenario is different from the present. So if you would talk about, let's see, this was a policy that was focusing on climate smart agriculture. So it was focusing on productive systems, efficient to sustainable livelihoods. The policy was focusing on risk, integrated risk management, but also climate change adaptation. So we wanted to make sure that the scenarios would talk about these type of issues. So we wanted to make sure the scenarios would talk about capacity building, how in these different futures they would manage knowledge, who would be doing research, would they be doing research, how would they be generating climate information, would they be sharing climate information between the countries of the region, how would they be managing, would there be land use change, how would they be managing ecosystem services, would they think about that at all? So what this did is that we would make sure that these stakeholders made sure that these scenarios talked about these issues. And what they then did was actually and literally test whether the different elements of the policy, so the objectives and the actions, would actually work in these different scenarios. And if they wouldn't work, stakeholders would indicate why, what the constraints were in the context that would difficult that. And they would also give suggestions on how to improve the policy to make it work better. And what they then did in the second step is, in the third step, is that they would compare all those recommendations, because you can get a certain recommendation from the context of one scenario, but what you want to look at are the recommendations that come through in several scenarios. So that way we can really understand what are the main strengths and weaknesses of the policy, what are critical assumptions on which the policy is based that we're really not taking into account and that should be changed. And what they then did in the last step was basically write up all these different recommendations. And within a very short time after the workshop, they were then presented. First, they were really systematized and written up a little better, and then they were presented to the Board of Ministers. So I'd just like to share one or two of what we think were the main success factors of this process. Something really important is that there was already this regional organ of representatives and people working on climate change that all thought together and hopped along in this process to help formulate the policy. I think something really important was that CCAFS was already quite known in the region. We had a track record of supporting ministries of agriculture within policy development, and we had also already supported the formulation of different policies through future scenarios. So that gave quite a bit of confidence in taking this approach, which is quite different, right? I think another really important driving and supporting factor was that Costa Rica, the year before, had been leading the COP in Paris, in the sense that the secretary that was leading the COP in Paris was a Costa Rican lady. So there was quite a bit of international focus on Costa Rica, and we really wanted to show that we had a visionary idea of the future, and that's why that this policy had to be formulated. And I think another success factor is that it's a great idea to formulate a policy, but we have to take into account that a lot of things can change. And when we think about what might change, what we then want to do is, I think the main reason why we explore possible futures is to make better decisions in the present. So those just to give an idea of these different success factors.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Did you want to, I think just in terms of time, Marieke, we've just got to wrap up. And I just wanted to hand over if there's any of our participants that are working on, influencing policies or processes like this that might have some questions. And if you have questions throughout the session, we can make sure that Marieke can help us answer those. Is there any questions from the floor, or anyone would like to raise their hand and ask a question? Please let us know now. If there's anything, I'll stop my share. Are there any questions from the floor, or anyone like to raise their hand? Any questions in terms of the process or influencing policy development using scenarios? Great. So Malako has just asked a question. In a scenario with insufficient political will, but clear will by other stakeholders, how best can we navigate this? So great question, Malako.
Yeah. So good question. Thank you. I think that the reason why we explore these kind of scenarios is that we want to think if these things are not in place, then what might happen to help us procure or make sure that things move in a right direction, right? Which is the worry in this scenario. And what stakeholders usually do is then look at how that might happen. So in this case, if there's insufficient political will, but other stakeholders are interested, what I could imagine, but that's only my idea, other people could have other ideas, is that civil society has a very strong way of making sure that on a political level actions are taken. So that's at least in Central America, but I know that also in your region, civil society is we can really make people can really make a difference. But as I said, that really depends on the people that are developing the scenario, and I think it's key to look at these the context to understand what are tiny trends that we're already seeing that might change that situation.
Great, thanks so much. Just in terms of the interest of time, we might have to record some of these questions in the chat box and get these to Marieke to answer, and we'll make sure we add that to the event page, because we need to get everyone into these method tools breakout sessions. I just want to thank you so much for attending. We know, just so everyone, we're all in the SADC region in the afternoon, but it's just close on, I think, 6 in the morning there in Costa Rica. So we're really, really appreciative for the early morning wake up. Thank you very much. And just keep registering your questions and we'll make sure to get those. So thank you so much. Great. Constance, I'll hand over to you in terms of explaining how we're going to do our breakouts now.
Brilliant. And I just want to add my thanks to Marieke. That was just so nice to hear such a concrete case about how you've used this at the regional level. So now we're going to break into groups. You've been hearing from us for quite some time. And so what we'd like to do is that we're going to have breakout groups so that each of you have an opportunity to work with members of the training team and dig deeper into maybe the questions that you may have. For example, we're going to use these breakouts you can talk to the resource person, the moderator that you're working with about the method, the tool, the steps of the method, any questions about how to apply tools or the method, the definitions, and how tools and methods can work together. So that is the setup. Now, this is where it gets fun. We are going to have 6 breakout rooms, and if you see on the screen, room 1 is going to be about defining the scope in a Foresight exercise and stakeholder mapping, and Romy will be leading that. Room 2, Leslie will be leading us on trends analysis, horizon scanning, and future megatrends in SADC region. Room 3, Claire will be leading on climate risk in SADC and future hotspots. Room 4, I will be leading on systems mapping, visioning, causal analysis, and backcasting. Room 5, Sabrina will be leading on drivers, building scenarios, and implications. And room 6, Philip will be covering climate resilient pathways and transformation. So those are our options, and these are building off what you told us last week. So in order for us to know which room you would like to join, and on that topic, under the participants tab, as we have been doing when we go and we add our country to our name, we want to use that rename option now and put the room number, the breakout room number, at the beginning of your name. This is so Pierre can break us into the right group. So there's a little example there on the lower right, where you put the number in front of your name. So if I could invite people to start that, and Pierre, if you want to add anything to the instructions.
Sorry, what did you say, number 3? Oh. Yeah.
So you can choose which of these room numbers you want to join, which of these topics you want to join. Just put the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 in front of your name.
Thank you, Constance. Nothing to add on the instruction. I see that some people are putting the number in the chat, which is useful, but it would really make my life much easier if you can rename yourself, because that way I can just identify you in the participant list and not to have to look through. Yeah, I see some numbers are coming, so let's please continue to do that. Use the rename function to add your the room number that you would like to be assigned to. This is going to take a few seconds because I have to allocate a participant manually.
So Zulu, Shepo, and Tombi, could you just, I'm seeing them come in the chat box, if possible to go under your name and you say more, and just like we renamed ourselves at the beginning of the chat, so instead of putting it in the chat box, can you just rename your name? If you do it in the naming function under the participants tab, not in the chat box, that will help Pierre a lot.
Yeah, Indeed, thanks, Sabrina.
Sandile, Irene, same thing if possible. And I can help rename some of these.
Great. And those of you that have already put your numbers, if you feel like, okay, I need to stretch, this is a great moment to get your body ready for the next round.
So there's a couple more, still just got to rename. Great, Zulu, I've seen you've done that in the naming. Thank you so much.
Once you decide on a room number, please don't change it. Otherwise, I'll have to reassign you again. Yeah, I see we're getting most of them, so this is great. Thanks for being so collaborative. We got still a few.
If we were all together in the room, this would be easier. We could just walk to a corner.
Yes.
Or,
now
so
I have to walk you, so it's slightly different. All right. I see still some people which are have not indicated any number.
Metelo, Luleka,
Okondo,
Amanda, Leslie, if you guys want to put yours as well. Esther. Make your last selections. Yemi. Chapiso had said 5. I can change for you.
Thanks, Sabrina. That's useful. Also something that I might have missed in the chat.
Yemi, did Yemi put in the chat? Let's see. I think we're getting quite close.
Yeah. We still have a few unassigned.
And if you really can't decide, we can just nominate you into a room. No problem. Choice is hard sometimes.
Also, you want to be in 2 at the same time, but it's not possible.
Of course, of course.
Too much choice. It's like ice cream flavors.
I mean,
all right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think we got most of the people in the allocated. We still have probably about 10, which are 8 to 10, which are not allocated. But I suggest we start, and then I'll see if I can help them bring into.
Thank you so much.
Into the room.
So I can take my screen down now. Do we everybody?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks, Constance. Let me just. I'm doing the final check.
Sorry, we can't do.
So this was 20 minutes, huh? I don't know if it felt less or more, but it was 20 minutes. You could see the countdown clearly, I guess.
It was 5 minutes.
It was not.
I don't think that was real. Really?
I know. We know that you changed the clock. That was it was 2 minutes.
No,
Lily was. I think you planted Lily in the main room with me just to make sure that I was not cheating. So Lily can confirm she was watching me all the time, and I didn't touch the timer.
Well, but it didn't feel 20 minutes to me either.
I didn't get to say goodbye to group 4. I so appreciated you.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, but the right one, hopefully. Yes. Because we will actually be sending everyone. Let me get that right, sorry. Right. Does everyone also agree that the virtual 20 minutes are the fastest ever? I think Claire said it right. They're like cosmic minutes that go really, really fast. We won't have time to do a reflection. We're not going to reflect across our different groups. I hope everyone had a chance to at least get some of the questions ignited between your moderators. I just want to thank everyone who's come on board from the moderator's side. It's really valuable that you were able to help. And whatever was not answered in the group, please put in the chat box so that we can make sure that those moderators can get those questions. And we will, like before, be doing a Q&A, which will add to the website resources. So thank you so much to all the moderators for the panels. And I hope even in a short space of time that some of the participants were able to get some of the questions and a review on some of these key methods. So thank you very much. We now have a chance for the participants to break off into even smaller groups. And this is really, like we said, webinar 6 was about a tool and a method review, but also an application. We hope that through this training series, we've inspired you that these tools and methods are really tailored to how you want to apply them and how you want to use them. So we wanted to have a short, brief discussion amongst our peers and to really say, what do I think I'll take forward from the training? What tools and methods and application? So we have a quick breakout, but it will be much smaller. You're going to be in smaller groups. These will be random. So when we get into the groups, we can just all give a sort of brief discussion on where we work and how we might apply and what we're thinking of in terms of the tools and methods and how we might do them together. So we asked in the chat box last week, and some of the feedback was around what sort of areas are you working on. So we had some themes coming out. For example, women's rights, agribusiness, human-wildlife conflict, climate-smart agricultural strategy development. So we've had lots of really interesting themes people are thinking about now using the Foresight process for. We also sent out a survey, and this was sent out as part of the information, and Lily will be posting the link again to the survey. So we really we would love to hear back from everyone in terms of the survey. And this was really also trying to understand a little bit more how people were going to use the tools and the methods. And we say this because we're also finalizing our toolkit. So it'll be very valuable to understand how we can sort of help make the case studies more practical to you. So there is a survey. And so many of you will have already been thinking about this application, and hopefully that will help the group work. So basically, a suggestion in your group, maybe you have 1 minute to tell your colleagues about the theme and scale you're working on and how you might apply the tools and methods. So this won't be moderated, this will be moderated by yourselves. This is a peer exchange moment in terms of how you want to apply the training. So Pierre is going to break us off and we will then come back to reflect a bit across the groups and have a final Q&A amongst us. So Pierre, do you mind splitting us randomly?
I don't mind at all. I'm just setting the timer to 10 minutes.
Oh.
And
2 minutes in normal time, right?
I don't know, but you can time you can
I'm
start
gonna
timing.
time when my Casio
Yes, please.
stopwatch. Okay.
Yes. So I'm gonna open the room in 3, 2, 1. So that's perfect. So still too short. I'm asking for everybody in the breakout.
2 minutes.
I had even more witness today at this.
That was really 2 minutes in real time.
2 minutes in real time. I agree. Roy,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
But we managed to say what we wanted to say, so.
Love it. Great. I mean, in terms of a quick feedback, does anyone from the groups want to please raise your hand and we can open the floor? Does anyone want to reflect back on maybe your group's discussion, some interesting examples you heard? It would be great to hear some of maybe the theme or something, just a very quick, condensed 30-second or so summary of your group. Does anyone want to offer up? Please just raise your hand and we can hear from a couple of the groups, maybe. Do we have any volunteers? If not, I could nastily volunteer some people we were chatting in our group. Any volunteers? Anyone want to reflect?
I think that's called volunteering.
I don't see any hands up, so let me get the ball rolling. Maybe Blessing, or Alberto or Susanna from my group, do you want to just quickly just describe what we discussed in our group very quick? We had some really nice examples. Does any one of you three want to volunteer? If not, I can give a quick summary. Anybody? Susanna, Blessing, Susanna, great. Just give a quick summary of some of the themes you've heard and what the tools we're going to maybe hone down on.
Okay, Blessing is, well, in summary, most of us Blessing and I have to go back and use some of the tools to open up our teams, open up the minds of our teams to different foresighting exercises. And Blessings is working on some, interested in elephant mortalities due to climate related modalities, and most of everything that's climate related on elephants. And he's working with a team that he's going to have to enlighten on foresight tools going forward. I'm working on Women Who Farm Africa, and our flagship program, which is a leadership development program for women farmers, needs us to do lots of stakeholder mapping and analysis all the way to the bottom, from the trainers of trainers to the women farmers that are going to benefit in this particular exercise. Alberto, who is an entrepreneur, is going to use a lot of backcasting, and I hope I've done a great job.
Great job. Yeah, we had some really different examples in our group. Thanks so much, Susanna. Anyone else from the group who just wants to quickly sort of hear what they heard from their peers on some of the applications, maybe some of the tools you're thinking of applying, how you're going to take the training forwards?
Hello.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In my group, my two colleagues, well, they have used this method previously, so they are basically experts. But in my case, I've been heavily involved in helping small dairy farmers in developing strategic plans. So I believe that after going through this process, there are a few tools I should be able to use to improve my approach to the delivery of strategic plans. I'm also involved in food loss and waste, particularly looking at the reasons why, the factors that lead to the low adoption of technology for reducing post-harvest food losses amongst the smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I believe, yeah, some of what we've gone through would be very useful in the work that I'm doing. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chikoya. And I'm glad we had some experts in your group. That's great. I would say pretty much everyone is an expert right now. You've been through 6 of these webinars. So I hope you leave feeling like someone said, have you done Foresight? You say, yes, I'm comfortable. So thank you so much. I think we've got time for just maybe 1 or 2 more reflections. Anyone else would like to take the floor just to give us some feedback?
Hello?
Zulu.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yes. Yeah, hi. Yeah, in our group, we are in different fields. The other one is working with, I think, in the animals. But I would speak about my organization and what I've learned, especially that doing women land rights in the extractive industry and natural resources. So here, what we need is to map up. Of course, we've done the mapping up of all the stakeholders, which we have included traditional leaders and the government on land issues. But I think there's a stakeholder that we left out. This is the private sector itself, the mining companies that are taking land out of these women, because this is where the mining is done. So those are the people that we need to bring on board. Looking at the land is a cardinal issue into women's agriculture because it's a livelihood. That's where agriculture is done. That's where they collect firewood. That's where they collect all this non-timber forest product. So indeed, this course is going to help me to do better into our organization. And from here, I'm going to have a meeting with our staff and just to share the information that we have learned from here so that we can do things better.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zulu. And really, I'm glad. And I hope from the framework and the approach we learned, the whole stakeholder engagement process happens throughout these different phases and stages. So even when you've mapped your system, when you've started to do your scenarios and you've looked at your scenarios, you'll still maybe start to think, are there stakeholders that are missing? Are there people that we've not engaged in our process? And when we've thought about this potential future, are there other stakeholders we need to bring in and think about? So I think, great example, thanks so much. Constance, I think we have time for one more.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you so much. I found that this webinar is an eye-opener to me. I'm involved in a local, I'm promoting food security gardening project with the unemployed youth. And it's really not at local level, and it's really not viable because I'm much used of a top-down approach, and I discovered that I have missed some stakeholders because it's not viable. I need to include everyone, even the elder people in the communities. And I'm thinking also that I think I have to reflect back and use all the tools, methods to go through problems with them, planning, engaging everyone in the loop.
Super.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Congratulations on your work. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm just going to, if you have any more reflections, please keep those coming in the chat box. I'm just going to now, Constance is okay, I'm going to share my screen to run through the closing.
That'd be lovely. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Okay. Great. And we have a couple of polls that we want to run.
So we will have some time in the networking session if we need to follow up on some of the questions in the chat box. But we'd really like to invite you now to share your views on actually a question we asked in the very first session around how we think about the future. So this is actually a multi-part question, but you're going to see it all at once. And thank you so much, Pierre. So if you would answer the questions there, just click the future is, and there are multiple choices. Pick that, and then you can scroll down and respond to the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, or fifth. So we would just appreciate your taking a few minutes to just give us some insights, please, on how we think about the future.
So you'll just have to you'll need to answer all the questions and then you press submit. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope everybody's able to see the poll, which should be displayed now in the main screen. So as Constance was saying, there are multiple questions. There are 5, 6 questions. So you should be able to scroll through. I see some votes are coming in. So we should allow probably a few minutes because it's more than one question and there's a bit of reading to do. So no pressure.
I should have some nice inspiring background music about the future.
Oh, we should.
Come on, Pierre.
I don't have anything at hand, but that's possible, of course, to play any audio or video. Just don't ask me to sing. You don't want to do that.
Okay, I'm just going to keep checking the chat.
Yeah, I see the responses are increasing, so let's let it run for maybe 10 more seconds, if that's all right with you, Sabrina and Constance.
That's great.
Absolutely. We appreciate the responses.
Thank you so much for getting quite a few of the votes now. I'll just let it run for 20, 30 seconds more. Let's try and get up to 80% of the vote. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think we'll get there.
Super.
We just need 1 or 2 more, I guess.
It's heavenly. We just need 1 or 2 more people to vote.
And then we'll move directly to our next. Okay.
All right, shall we close it in 3, 2, 1? I'm ending the poll now.
Okay, and we'll hold that poll and move on to the next poll, which is very much, sorry, Sabrina, on the next slide, which is about the evaluation. So we're very keen to get your insights on 2 polls that'll be shared together on the evaluation, because we're always looking at ways to improve. And following this, we'll ask a question that you can write anything you want. So your overall, the training webinars, please rate those. We would be very appreciative of your rating of overall and your rating around the content.
Yeah, this will probably be quicker because there are only 2 questions. We're already at 50% of the attendees that have voted. I see there are also some comments in the chat. Probably we'll go back to them later.
Perfect.
Yes.
I feel we should have season 2 of the training.
Sabrina, shall we close it in 5?
Yes, perfect.
What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the poll is going to close 3, 2, 1, and the poll is over now. Should we share the results?
Yes,
Would like
please.
to share the results?
Sure.
Here we come.
Very good.
Very kind.
Very kind is right. Absolutely generous. So
Great.
very useful.
Thank you so much for those.
Absolutely. So we'd like to now, and I think building on some of these responses, we'd love to learn how you would want this training to be improved. If you could change anything, if you could improve anything about this webinar series, what would it be? And we would like those responses in the chat box. And what would be your biggest learning outcome from the 6 webinars? So the chat box, let's get rumbling on that and let us know how we could improve and your biggest learning.
Sure.
Thank
and
you.
Those people in the chat box that are asking about links to resources, etc., don't worry, we're going to close with all that information. So for now, just any responses on anything we could improve to do this better, and what was your learning? If you had to meet up with someone tomorrow morning and say, what did you learn over the last 6 weeks? What would you say?
And if you felt we didn't meet expectations, we'd love to hear how we could have.
So if anyone wants to add anything to the chat box for these, that would be really useful. Great, thanks.
Great,
for seeing.
good suggestions. Group discussion.
Okay, that's great. This is really valuable. Thanks so much, everybody. Sure, we'll let a couple of more of those come in. Please keep registering any feedback, best sort of key learning together. That's really valuable. Thanks so much. We're going to keep recording all of these. This is really valuable in terms of if we were to run this again or how we can improve, etc. So thank you so much. Please keep these coming. Yeah, so I'll just keep just a quick summary in terms of rounding up. Just again to thank everyone in terms of the partnership for this series. I know you've seen a lot of similar, some of the similar faces from the training team, but this has been a really wide partnership amongst the SADC Food and Agricultural Natural Resources Department, CADESA, as well as the SADC GIZ adaptation to rural, to climate change in rural areas, the ACRA program, which is kindly funded by the German ministry. So this has really been a wide partnership. There's been huge workflow between everyone, and we just really thank that these partners came together to deliver this training series, which I hope people have found really valuable. Well done. We're at the end of a 6-part webinar series, a 6-part training. So absolutely fantastic. I think we've been overwhelmed with the scale of participation, the learning, the diversity, and it's actually really sad that we're not going to see you next week live. But this is not the end. There's many things on the horizon in terms of the SADC Futures project. For those who have attended all 6, we have been tracking, and there will be a certificate of participation that will be emailed to you tomorrow. So you'll receive, and on the back of the certificate has got some information on the tools, etc. So well done for those who were able to connect and to link in with us. And we really thank you for following us through the whole series. There has been quite a few questions just come up in the chat box in terms of, please, can we have the PDFs? Can we have the information, etc. So I just wanted to make sure everyone felt clear on next steps. There will be a toolkit. So this toolkit is basically a 6-part module toolkit, which is bringing together all of the content you've seen and more. So it gives us an opportunity that we're able to build in the case studies, that we've brought in some of the question and answers from the webinars. We've also allowed us, it gives us a bit more space and time to flesh out more examples than we were able to deliver in the webinar training. So this toolkit will be being published shortly. You will get a lot of information about it. You'll have all the resources in here, and this should be a really comprehensive way for you to go through each module and chapter. I've also just seen a request saying I would love if I could do this online. So we hoped that this would also be a very useful offering. And over the last 6 weeks, as well as the webinars, we've been busily planning out an e-learning course. So this will also be a certified course that will be available in August. And this will allow you to go through each module step by step yourself. You can download the content and use it offline. You can use it on a mobile. You can use it on a desktop. Basically, it's an online e-learning course with all the content you've just seen. There will be videos, there will be test questions, and you will then also be able to be certified through this e-learning course. So this will be available on the CADESA and CCAFS websites, and we'll be explaining and again sending all this information over email about how you can do the e-learning course. So this will be a chance for colleagues who were not able to connect, who had connectivity issues, that you can also spread this amongst your peers to say there's an opportunity. This e-learning course is open-ended. And then there will be a dedicated SADC Futures microsite website that's going to have all of the reports. It's going to have the accompanying materials. So for example, in the slides, you saw a little bit of the historical analysis. We've got a whole report on that. We've got the megatrends report. We've got a big analysis on climate risks. So all of these resources will be available on the website, and they'll also allow you to access the e-learning course, all the webinar recordings, the toolkits, all the information. So I hope everyone feels comfortable that there's a lot of information coming your way. And also importantly, we want to make the discussion continue with the CARDESA D groups. We're also looking at ways that we can set up a database in terms of everyone connected here. And we will be finishing with a networking session today to allow people to exchange contacts and make sure everyone goes away with the contacts they want to have, just like we would at the end of a workshop process, we would have had a chance to chat. So I hope that answers some questions about the training resources and how everybody will be able to access the materials coming from the webinar series. We will then just be having a networking session. This will happen, Philip Thornton from CCAFS is going to do our closing. Just before that, I just wanted to lay out some of the ideas and ground rules for this networking session. As mentioned, the room will stay open for another half an hour. You can ask questions. We can keep responding to the chat box, the things that we've not managed to get to. You can also share your contacts privately with people. You might start a conversation in plenary. This is a sort of open-ended networking. There's a screenshot here to show you. On the name, if you want to message someone privately under the participants list, you can scroll down to the person you were trying to reach and say private message, and then you're able to type the message there. Or vice versa, if you want to type into the chat like you've been doing, that's fine. We just want to give people the opportunity, if you don't want to share your contact details widely, please use the private message function to allow you to start a conversation. So the networking, that will start just shortly. And now I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to invite Philip just to give us, on behalf of the partnership and the series, just a couple of closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Sabrina. It's my pleasure to bring this series of webinars to an end. When Sabrina and I started talking about what we were going to do with, this must have been like late February, early March, and the COVID crisis was building up. And we thought, what on earth are we going to do? Can we even do this? And I think the answer is resoundingly, yes, we can. And it's been done through the inputs and the enthusiasm of a large number of people. Just to, I don't leave anybody out, but big thanks to the funders, of course, to BMZ, GIZ, and to the oversight from CARDESA and FANR of SADC, and to the inputs of many people, Leslie, Claire, Romy, and today Marieke with a really nice example case study. Amanda has been instrumental, Lily on the communications, Laura has helped in some of the work, and the design. Special thanks to Deborah Hart for the design. I think the slide decks that she's helped to produce for this have been fantastic. They just look brilliant. Big thanks to Pierre for navigating us through this Zoom, and it's really cool what you can do with Zoom, and I hope you all agree that that's all gone pretty much flawlessly. And then, of course, biggest thanks to the two leads, to Constance and to Sabrina, who put in huge amount of work in developing all this this material, and I think it's a fantastic job. And then lastly, thanks to all of you, to the participants, for your engagement, your interest, your being willing to give up the time. I think it's been a great series. And please don't forget that there's the toolkit coming, the e-learning course, and the website. And so in the future, please do keep in touch and keep safe. And thanks very much.
Super. Thank you so much, Philip. Thanks for that. And yeah, I think Lily is been leading on our communication. She's been our sort of behind the scenes, really helping everything come together. I don't know, Lily, if there's any information on the D groups, etc., please also put that in the chat box about ways people can sign up, or ways we can keep the conversation going. So yeah, with that those closing remarks, I don't know if there's anything else from you, Constance, before.
Just a huge thank you. But we're here now. As Serena has outlined, we're ready for some networking.
Super. So yeah, the room will stay open for another half an hour. We're formally closed on the session. So if you are having to leave us now, we'd love you could just turn on your video quickly. We can have a final wave if you have to go. But for those staying, also please feel free to put your video on, to type anything, to free flow, etc., etc. So this is your moment to meet peers, to ask questions, to share.
Sabrina.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I please request? Can I please request that?
Okay, great. Sorry, I found
you. Can I please request that?
My hand is up.
Bongani, on behalf of the clients, I mean, on behalf of the participants, Bongani, can you please represent us and just say a couple of words?
Yes.
Wait, were you reading my mind, Sandile?
That's
why I was raising up my hand.
I'm not sure how I got this nomination, but
no, it's fine. You can go on.
What happens when you know young men in the group?
No, it's fine. Go.
On behalf of all the trainees, I think I know about 10 people on this group from the region and from South Africa. I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues, thank you so much. Actually, for me, it's how this course was run, which left me, I'm attending a lot of Zoom things, but this one, I think it was nice for you to put that first line, that best training in 2020. It is the best training in 2020. And I actually said to someone, you know, under normal circumstances, would have to buy air tickets, travel, go to wherever they are training to do this. But here we are, we got all this for free. So we really want to say thank you so much for your commitment, for your time. And I think you saw in the chat, one of the things that we learned from you as a team is how you run this smoothly. It's 2 hours, but the way you utilize those 2 hours, I don't know, I'm a lecturer, I don't even know if I can manage my time that way. It's been so wonderful. And we just want to say thank you, and we would like to say keep it up. We are in Africa, and it's not many times that we get this kind of training at this level. So maybe Sandile had a good reason to choose me. It's because at this level, this kind of training, this level of training, it is rare to get it for free in this part of the world. And we really want to say thank you so much. And please don't give up. If one day we are going to meet physically, it will be a wonderful meeting for all of us. Sabrina, and our biggest one was also seeing Philip's face. You don't know how many times we've quoted Philip in our papers as we write our papers, and to see his face, it's been a big plus for me. And also interesting for me to realize that there is Sabrina, there's Amanda, there's Romy. They are not far from us, and we didn't know we have these resources around close to us. I've been busy sending a message to Sabrina that, can you give me your details? Because really, we would call her in our projects when time allows. So I could talk and say everything, but I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues and behalf of everyone from Zambia, from Rwanda, from Uganda, from South Africa, from Malawi, from just trying all the names that I remember, and in Malaysia and wherever, it's all over the world. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate this.
Thank you so much. My heart is bursting.
Time.
Thank you.